Welcome to the Dietitian Side Hustle podcast. My name is Katie Dodd, and I'm a nutrition entrepreneur. I spent 7 years as a side hustler before diving into entrepreneurship full time. Before making the leap, I was bringing in 6 figures through my side hustle. If I can do it, you can too. This podcast is for dietitians, interns, and students who want to be inspired to start or perfect the side hustle of their dreams. Let's do this. Hello and welcome to the 116th episode of the Dietitian Side Hustle podcast, Mental Health and Entrepreneurship. So at the time of recording this episode, it is Wednesday morning. If you're a regular listener, you likely know that my episodes go live every Wednesday, but this episode hasn't aired yet. I'm recording it now. And, last night I had on my to-do list, make sure you record and post a podcast episode. I was a little busy, didn't get to it. And I've been thinking about what am I going to talk about. I feel like when it comes to these episodes, I always know what I'm going to talk about. I very seldom struggle with what am I going to discuss. So this morning I had some running around to do. When I came back home, I was like, okay, I actually have to make a decision because I have to sit down and record this episode today so I can air it. So I thought, why not talk about mental health? So, I think back to the last 3 episodes, and I know we had a little bit of a theme with money, right? I talked to my business coach, Greg Todd. We talked about how to make money. I spoke to Amy Gorin. We talked about how to make money through working with brands. I talked to Liz Jalkowitz with how to make money through self-publishing on Amazon. And I initially was going to talk more about how to make money, but I was thinking about why I like talking about money on this podcast. And I think part of it is that it's a taboo subject. It's one of these things where who are we to speak out into the world that we want to make money? That makes us greedy. We should just want to help people. And both can be true, right? We could want to make money and help people. Greg Todd, my business coach, he always says that your bank account is a direct reflection of how many people you're helping. And I love looking at money that way, that we can help people and we can make money. And there really is no shame in talking about money and talking about wealth building. So I think I always love talking about money, but then mental health. You guys, this is something I'm very passionate about. I've talked about it briefly at different parts throughout the podcast. So if you've been a regular listener, you might have heard me have some conversations about mental health in the past in tiny little chunks. But I think it is a taboo subject. It's something that's becoming more and more common. But I figured, you know what? I could talk about money or I could talk about mental health. And today we're just going to have a candid conversation about mental health and entrepreneurship because I think it's a really important conversation to have. Now, this is going to be unscripted, but I will tell you I took some notes. I think to do this episode justice, maybe I should have spent some more time in research, but that's okay. This is just going to be a good conversation. I am going to share some resources at the end. I do want to provide, just to be completely transparent, that this episode could be triggering for some people because we are going to talk about mental health. I'm going to share some of my experiences with mental health. I'm going to be diving into a lot of things. So for some people, this might not be an episode you want to listen to, but I hope that for those of you who this won't be triggering for, that you dive in and enjoy this transparent, honest, taboo conversation, right? So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie Dodd, and I run the Dietitian Side Hustle podcast. I am an amazing mom, a full-time entrepreneur, a goal crusher, a business coach, an award-winning preceptor of dietetic interns, and I periodically struggle with depression and anxiety. On today's episode, I'm going to share my own story with mental health. I'm going to talk about mental health and entrepreneurship, and I'm going to be sharing some resources for managing mental health and give you some action items as we close things up. So let me talk to you guys a little bit about my story and my own journey with mental health. I was born in 1983, grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I feel like that was a season where we just didn't talk about mental health. Mental health isn't more common today than it was back then, but at least where I grew up, it was something we didn't talk about. You pushed it down. You pushed it way deep down, and you didn't talk about that stuff, right? I look back and I was horribly shy as a child. And with the knowledge that I have now, looking back, I am 99% sure that I had social anxiety disorder as a child and received no treatment for it. I went on this, path of entrepreneurship and ended up, I think I've really worked my way out of social anxiety disorder, though sometimes it does trigger me. But I grew up in the season where we didn't talk about it. If I look back, I think I probably had anxiety for most of my life. I just didn't know that it wasn't normal. I thought everyone felt this way. And it wasn't until later on in life when I was dealing with some mental health issues for someone in my family that I started doing a lot of research and reflecting on oh man, I think I have this too. So I remember actually doing a screen online for social anxiety disorder, and every question was so triggering. I was like, that feeling. I'm like, oh, this feeling is anxiety. That's what this is. Because all of these questions I was reading, it was like, yes, yes. Oh, I feel that. Like, oh, this isn't normal. Everyone doesn't feel like this. And so it was very eye-opening for me. This wasn't that long ago, actually, that I discovered this piece. But I grew up in a time where we just didn't talk about it. Now, my first real experience with mental health that I knew was mental health was when I had my son almost 12 years ago now, and I had postpartum depression. I had postpartum depression really, really bad, and I struggled with the shame of it because at the time I associated depression with happiness. I thought that I didn't recognize that, no, I'm just depressed. It is a chemical imbalance in my brain. I thought, gosh, I'm not happy, and I have so many reasons to be happy. I've got this beautiful child. Like, I have all these reasons to be happy. What is wrong with me? So I didn't get help. I didn't get help for a long time. And by the time I finally got help, I was about a year postpartum. And I don't know at that point if it was still postpartum or if it was just depression at that point. And I did end up getting some help, got into counseling. I got on medication. And it was really amazing because after 6 weeks being on medication, my depression went away. So in my situation, I was very lucky. Sometimes people have to try different medications. It doesn't always work. I was doing meds with counseling, but I was so lucky that it did go away. But it was just this reminder of like, oh yeah, this is a chemical imbalance in my brain. This isn't weakness. This isn't unhappiness. This isn't me not being strong enough. And I'm so glad that I was actually able to get the resources and help that I needed. So I think that was my first experience with like, oh yes, this is like mental health. So I think along my journey with mental health, part of it has been just because it impacts so many people that I know, and also it impacts me. And it's something I'm just so fascinated with. So I think over the years with my own journey, it has become awareness of mental health in general, and then also mental health within me, and also acceptance of there should be no shame in mental health. I think that there is because it's part of the mental illness, right? But there should be no shame in it. And we know this because we know, like, we don't feel ashamed if we get diagnosed with some other medical condition, but for some reason, when we get diagnosed with something in our brain, we just go there, right? We go to these places of like, oh, I just need to toughen up. I just need to, pull up my bootstraps or wherever our brains take us. But I think for me, there's been a lot of acceptance to where I could have this conversation with you and I could be transparent about where I've been and where I am and not have any shame in that, because I know that a lot of you listening, you get it. You've been there. Maybe you've been there and you've never actually accepted, oh, wait, I was struggling because of that stigma behind it. But I think this should be a conversation that we have, and there shouldn't be shame behind it, right? So let's talk about this year. So for those of you who have been following my journey, you know that I am now in my 11th month of being a full-time entrepreneur. I went from being a side hustler, making 6 figures, left my safe, secure full-time job, became a full-time entrepreneur, and I went into 2022 so excited, so blessed. Life was amazing, you guys. I will tell you, my journey with mental health the last few years, I've actually been pretty darn good. And as I became a full-time entrepreneur, I'm getting time freedom, financial freedom. Everything in my life is so amazing. But there were a couple pockets of my life that weren't amazing because of things related to mental health. So about a few months into this year, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start getting some help for these areas because I want every area in my life to be super amazing, right? And one of the things, and I'm not going to dig deep into the specifics of what I'm working on, but as I've gotten deeper into working on these issues that before were just pushed down, it's brought up a lot of issues with depression and anxiety. It's been more, I will say, like situational and episodic episodes of depression and anxiety. And it's hard, but I do recognize that I have to go through these things in order to be on the other side of having just this complete joyful life that I want. I want joy and I want freedom in every single area of my life. And I think that's part of this entrepreneurial journey is like, oh my gosh, life is so amazing. I want it to be the best that it can be. I want to live the life that God intended for me. And I don't want to hold myself back because of anything related to mental health. So while this year started off amazing, I have been struggling with some depression and anxiety this year. I will tell you, when I did my Launch for Blogging Accelerator program in June, I was really struggling. I was in a dark place. I was, when I wasn't on the computer, working with interns, having sales calls, doing all of the stuff that I was doing, I was in my bed crying. It was a really hard time and a really hard season for me. I will tell you guys that I am in counseling, and it's something that I'm continuing to work on. But I think for me, Depression and anxiety, for me, it's not constant. It comes and goes, and it's usually situational by things going on in my life. But for me, it's the worst thing ever. I hate mental health, you guys. If I'm honest, I hate it more than anything. It is painful on levels I cannot even describe. And, it's more painful than childbirth, any pain that I've ever experienced. It is the worst feeling in the world, at least for me. And if I could wish anything, it would be to wish this away, not just for me, but for everyone. But I do recognize that it is a part of who I am. It doesn't make me any less than. It doesn't mean that I can't be a leader. It doesn't mean I can't be an entrepreneur. It doesn't mean that I can't do any of the things I want to do. But I will tell you, there's times when I'm crying in bed that I struggle with, how can I be a leader and depressed? These are conversations we don't talk about, guys. And, I'm here today to talk to you about it and to say, yes, I can be a leader and I can struggle with depression. I also work on it and I'm working through it and all the things. But the shame and stigma of mental health sucks. It totally sucks. And I think that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you guys, because you listen to my podcast. A lot of you know my journey, and I want to be transparent with you guys. The happy, excited, peppy Katie, this is me. But there's also a part of me that struggles. There's a part of me that really struggles, and it doesn't mean anything negative about me, no matter what my brain sometimes likes to tell me. So let's talk a little bit about mental health and entrepreneurship, because I think for me, a little bit of the thing that I was struggling with was the fact that how can I be a leader? How can I lead people when I'm struggling? And for me, I will tell you in June, what happened is after that launch, I ended up going to Clearwater, Florida. I go there quarterly. I'm part of a business mastermind, Smart Success Healthcare Platinum Mastermind with my business coach, Greg Todd. And we met in person, and I made the decision to tell all of my mastermind friends, and when I say tell, I mean like bawling, weeping, telling them the state of where I was mentally and what I was going through. So I'm in this group, my business mastermind friends, and I'm just transparent and honest that I've been struggling with my mental health. I've been really struggling. I've been in a dark place. I've been crying. I've been struggling just to show up. I've been having to readjust my levels of what good enough is, understanding that maybe before I expected, 10 out of 10 work, but right now 3 out of 10 is just fine for the season I'm in, because that is my 10 out of 10 with what I'm going through right now. And I will tell you, when I shared with them, it was like, now I will tell you, let me back up. This is a safe group of people. This is a safe group of people who have my back. These are my humans. I love them so, so much. And I knew I was safe to share this with them. And because it is weird to be in a big, I've got there's 11 people in this group, and to share it at a table like I'm at a business conference and I'm bawling, and it was actually amazing. It just felt so freeing to speak it out into the world. It was no longer this thing that's swirling in my head of like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Spoke out into the world, and there was so much freedom. And my business mastermind friends are so amazing, and they built me back up. And I will tell you, I actually came back feeling so much better, when I was there in Florida, and even coming back from Florida, I just had so much more motivation and drive, because I was able to be my authentic self with my people and to have them support me and build me up. And the cool thing is, you guys, when we talk about this and have these conversations, it's amazing the number of Me Too's. Me too. I've been on medication since I was in my 20s. Me too. I struggle with this as well. Me too. I'm actively going through it right now. I just haven't said anything. And it's so amazing when you open up how much you realize you're not alone. And to have that support of people who really believe in you is amazing. Now, I will tell you that particular one, someone cried before me, which I appreciated. The very first person who shared, they were crying. I was like, oh, good. They set the tone. Let's go there. So it was kind of funny. We had to bring out the tissues. I feel like everyone was just releasing in that mastermind, but it was very, very good. But, So let me talk more about this mental health and entrepreneurship, because when I was there, I was having this conversation with my mastermind friends, just sharing with them like, man, this isn't something we talk about, especially as entrepreneurs, especially as leaders. And it's normal. So many people struggle with mental health, and why are we not having these conversations? So the question is, can I be a leader when I'm struggling? The answer is absolutely you can. I think there has to be a lot of grace for yourself. Like, be mindful to the things you tell yourself and recognize that this might be the mental health talking, right? It's part of the process. If you've ever struggled with mental health, that negative self-talk can be so horrible. And even if you don't struggle with mental health, I think I think all of us, we talk to ourselves so mean. We really need to change those conversations of the way that we speak to ourselves, but that's another conversation. So I ended up pulling up some statistics before I got on this episode because I did want to do a little bit of diving into, what does the statistics say? The very first thing I did was I went to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America website, the ADAA website, and I'm just reading some stuff from their website that I think is helpful for this conversation. I'm talking a lot about depression and anxiety because this is what I struggle with, right? Now, we know within anxiety, there's lots of types of anxiety. Within depression, there's lots of types of depression. Some people struggle with OCD, PTSD, ADHD, bipolar. There are lots of different mental health issues that plague people, but we do know that anxiety is the most common mental illness in the United States. 40 million adults, or about 19.1% of the population, struggle with anxiety. Now, here's the part that I think is really interesting and that really hurts my heart, actually. Anxiety disorders are highly treatable. We know that they're highly treatable, yet only 36.9% of those suffering with anxiety receive treatment. I did the math for you. So of those 40 million adults in the US who struggle with anxiety, that means that 14.8 million get treatment, but 25.2 million people do not get treatment for anxiety, and they're struggling and they don't have to. And if I just look at those statistics of 19% of people have anxiety, it's fair to say 19% of the people listening, maybe more, maybe less, you struggle as well. Depression. Now, these statistics, this was looking at 2017, and I'm curious maybe how it's changed since the pandemic, but in 2017, about 17.3 million adults in the US struggled with depression, about 6.7% of the population. So those are just some stats on the general population. So then I started diving deeper because I wanted to know, do we know anything about dietitians? What are the stats here? Couldn't find anything with my very brief lit review that I did, but I found an article that was published in 2021, so last year, in the Journal of Nutrition and Education and Behavior. It was called Prevalence of Depression, Anxiety, and Stress in Undergraduate Dietetic Students. That's really interesting, right? So this study looked at 611 DPD students, and I'm just going to read what the results said. So the results, an excerpt from the results. They said that most students experienced normal levels of depression, anxiety, and stress compared to the general population. So we just talked about what those stats were. So it sounds like, okay, very similar within these students. A subset experienced some level of depression, 30%, anxiety, 40%, and stress, 27%. Significant sources of stress were post-graduation plans, including internships, managing time, dietetic courses, finances, and self-imposed expectations. Now, I honed in on that self-imposed expectations because I don't think that's just with undergraduate students. I think that's with dietitians too. I think that is the perfectionism that so many dietitians struggle with. It's where we put these expectations on ourselves, and when we don't meet them, we beat ourselves up or we feel like we're not good enough. So this was just done in students, but you know what? I think it could probably translate to dietitians, especially dietetic entrepreneurs. So the next thing I started diving into was looking at depression or mental health in entrepreneurs, right? Because we're dietitians, but if you are going to be a side hustler, there's some level of entrepreneurship in there, right? So I actually found some articles that were saying like 72% of entrepreneurs are depressed or struggle with mental health. And I was like, whoa, dang. But then I actually found the study, and we know research, right? So just to share, this research article that was pulled from was an article in 2018 in Small Business Economics. And it was called The Prevalence and Co-Concurrence of Psychiatric Conditions Among Entrepreneurs and Their Families. Now, this study looked at 242 people. Not a big study, right? And they found that within that sample, that mental health directly or indirectly affected 72% of entrepreneurs. So I wasn't able to find like the exact number, but we know it's science. We probably don't know the exact number. But another article I found I thought was actually really good. It was in 2020, so last 2 years ago. And this was published in Small Business Economics. It was called Depression Among Entrepreneurs, a Scoping Review. And what it was looking at is they were talking about factors influencing depression in entrepreneurs. And I'm just going to read a sentence that I thought really stood out to me. And it said that, so talking about those factors that influence depression, these may result in feelings of failure and shame, And while stigma and a need to project a positive brand identity may prevent entrepreneurs from seeking the help that they need. I'm going to read that again. So it's talking about shame, failure, and the stigma and a need to project a positive brand identity may prevent entrepreneurs from seeking the help they need. And I think, number one, that hurts my heart because that means that people are struggling needlessly when they don't have to because they don't get help because there is the shame and the stigma. And especially for someone, and I'll even just say like myself, I put myself out there on this podcast, in email, on social media. I show my face. I am a positive, happy person. And sometimes there's that pressure to keep up that look. And is it okay if I pull back the curtain and share who sometimes I really am? I hope that all of you listening, if at all you struggle with mental health, even if you've never gotten help, even if you've never gotten treatment, that don't let the stigma, don't let the shame, don't let that fear of failure get in the way. You don't have to suffer, and there is no shame in mental health, okay? So I'm going to talk a little bit about resources because, like that article said, a lot of entrepreneurs don't get help because they feel like they have to project this image, right, of someone who's got their stuff together. You can have your stuff together and struggle with mental health, just letting you know. But let's talk about some resources. So let me tell you a little bit about what's helped me. So for me, counseling. I am still actively in counseling and I talk about it. My children know I'm in counseling. Mom's going to counseling. There's no shame and stigma in working on our mental health. Okay. So I was on medication for a season. When I was going through postpartum depression, I was on medication for a year. I did get off it. And in the future, if I have to get on meds again, I am not opposed to it. But as of right now, I'm in counseling. Now for me, things that help me, exercise. I actually exercise for my mental health. Sometimes I'll find myself, especially this year where I've been struggling a lot with my mental health. And when I'm having a really bad day, I'm like, oh wait, I haven't exercised. If you're watching this on YouTube, I have a Peloton behind me. It's pretty darn crazy how I could be really struggling with my mental health. I hop on that puppy. By the time I'm done sweating, I'm not struggling as much. Again, this is me. Everyone's a little different. So for me, I use exercise. I also use meditation, prayer, and I practice gratitude. Those are some things that do help my mental health. Another thing that actually has really helped me has been business coaching, you guys. And this is why I think my mental health has been so good for so long up until this little season that I've been going through. And I think it's because with the business coaching, there's so much focus on personal and professional development, believing in myself, having more confidence, surrounding myself with community that makes me believe in myself. I sometimes joke that business coaching is like counseling because I will tell you, having been in the business coaching world for as long as that I have been, having a business coach now being one myself, oh my goodness, you guys, I've never been more confident in who I am in all the ways, in who I am and how I project myself and how I look in all of the different ways. I am so very confident in myself, so much so I'm like, man, I wish that Katie 20 years ago felt this way. So for me, business coaching, holy cow, the more I work on my business, I'm working on me too because I am my business. And so business coaching actually has really helped me a lot in my mental health. So let's talk about other resources. So, and again, I mentioned these for things that I do, but counseling and therapy. Counseling and therapy is amazing, you guys. We talk about if you want good nutrition information, go see a dietitian. I was actually joking around with my own mastermind, the Blog Boss Mastermind, because we talk about mental health there. I like to talk about mental health. And we were actually joking about how I should record a podcast called Everyone Should Go to Counseling. And I actually kind of believe that. I think that everyone could benefit from counseling in a different season, in a different time. It all depends. But, if you want help with your mental health, counseling and therapy is amazing. It really is amazing. Sometimes it comes down to finding the right person. With my counselor, I really feel like I lucked out and found the right person. But even if you've had the experience, you went to therapy and you're like, it was horrible. Maybe you just didn't find the right person. So I would encourage you, if you feel like you need it, to try again, because we know with the research, counseling and therapy is amazing. Next, medication. Now, medication may be needed for a season or it may be needed forever. Again, there is no stigma with needing to be on medication for mental health. Sometimes it's medication and therapy that are combined, right? There's also complementary and alternative treatments that people use, meditation, yoga, acupuncture, etc. I mentioned for me, there's a few things that I use that help me in managing my own mental health. Community is another big thing. I think that being able to speak things out into the world makes a big difference. When you are stuck in your head and that voice is circling around, like with shame and the stigma and the failure and that negative self-talk, sometimes it can be really freeing just to speak out into the world, get it out of your head, and you could find a lot of freedom in that. I do want to say you want to make sure that you find a safe person to talk to. For a lot of people, that's going to be a counselor, that's going to be a therapist. But if you have a safe, trusted person in your life, have a conversation with them. Like, don't hold it in. Surround yourself with good community who's going to like believe in you and pull you up. And then finally, if you are struggling, the National Helpline, I'm just going to share the number. I'm going to say it twice in case you want to write it down. You could also Google National Helpline. But the number is 1-800-662-HELP. So that is 1-800-662-4357. That's a 24/7 number that you can call. And again, no shame and no stigma in mental health, right? So we are getting close to me wrapping up this conversation. I've been talking for 25 minutes all about mental health. I hope that it's been a good conversation for you guys. I know this has been, for me, I'm very grateful to have this platform, knowing so many of you are listening, to be able to have this conversation, because again, I think it's one that we need to have. So action items for you guys. I think my number one action item is I want you guys to reflect about what you heard today. Now, if you are listening to this and you're feeling like, oh, Katie, you're pulling up some things in me. I feel like you made this episode for me. You are speaking directly to my heart. If you feel like you need to, reach out to someone and start the process of getting help with whatever resources that you need. Again, I'm a huge advocate of therapy. That is a good place to start. Your primary care provider too, that could be a good place to start. And they could help you connect the dots if you need anything else from medication or alternative therapy, but reach out to someone. The second action item is, as you're reflecting, I really want to encourage you to dispel any feelings or beliefs related to shame and failure and stigma with mental health. There is no shame in struggling with mental health. So even if you want to say this out loud to yourself, I want you to say, I am enough, just the way I am, and I embrace who I am. Now, if you are someone who is listening who struggles with mental health, or is like, oh snap, I guess I do, when I'm listening to this conversation, I want you to know that you're not alone. And you guys listen to this podcast, right? So look at me. I'm someone that you listen to, you get information from. I hope you get, inspiration, motivation, tangible educational tools. And I struggle with mental health, right? And the truth of the matter is there is no shame, and no one's going to judge you. I think that's one thing I want to say. No one is going to judge you. And if you run across someone who judges you because of your mental health, they have no business being in your life. So you don't want them there anyways. So just find safe people to be around and recognize that the people who matter aren't going to judge you. They're going to build you up and support you. So, and I guess the last thing I want to say is that you can do anything. You could absolutely do anything, mental health or not. You may need a little help along the way, and that's okay, but you can do anything that you want to do. You could be an entrepreneur, a side hustler, any dream you have, you can accomplish. And if you are listening to this and you do not struggle with mental health, even if it's not a mental health issue, if you struggle with stress or anything, recognize taking care of our mental health in general is really important. And also having conversations with other people and being that support system and a support person for someone who maybe is struggling. So let's just talk more about mental health, guys. Let's talk more about mental health. Let's normalize this and not make this a taboo subject. And again, if you are struggling in any way, big or small, know that you do not have to struggle. You don't have to keep up a facade. You don't have to act like you're something you are not. And recognize that there is counseling, medication, community, the National Helpline. There are resources out there for you. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I hope that it was motivating and eye-opening. And my final message to each and every one of you is that you belong. You belong just as you are. There's beauty in all of your imperfections. And today I want you to be okay with being you. Now, I don't know all of you, but I know you're awesome. And I hope that you believe that too. So thanks so much for tuning in today. Thank you for being a listener of the Dietitian Side Hustle podcast. I am grateful for this community. And if you are not following me on Facebook, make sure you head on over to Facebook, go to Dietitian Side Hustle. We have an amazing group with over 4,000 dietitians, RDs to be just like you, who either have a side hustle or want a side hustle. So be sure to join us there. I go live every Monday and we have different conversations every Monday at 5:30 Eastern Standard Time is the Dietitian Side Hustle live show. So Hope to see you there, and I will see you next week on the podcast. Take care, guys.